My name is Hattie Lou Carter. I'm 79 years old. And on the morning of my birthday, I found a note sitting beside my plate, right where my children should have been. The house was quiet. No candles. No voices. Just the distant sound of the kitchen clock ticking like a countdown I hadn't known had started. I unfolded the note with hands that had changed 1,000 diapers, wiped 1,000 tears, stirred 1,000 pots of Sunday stew. It read, "You raised us, now it's time to go." No signature. No explanation. Just that one cold line, written in the handwriting I taught them myself. The night before, I had gone to bed with hope in my chest. It was my birthday, my 79th, and I hadn't asked for much. Just a small breakfast. Little love. Maybe a card. They had all been in the house the day before. Elijah, my oldest, and his wife Claudine. My middle girl, Tasha, who had been sleeping in the guest room for a few weeks, while she figured things out. Even baby Caleb, who still called me Ma like he did when he was 5. They were here. I heard them laughing from the hallway. I made them peach cobbler. They kissed me goodnight. They left. First, I thought it was a joke. I stood at the table, the note in my hand, looking around the empty kitchen like someone had just stepped out to grab orange juice. But there were no coats hanging by the door. No shoes by the mat. No leftover laughter in the walls. Just silence. And a suitcase by the front door. My suitcase. I sat down in the kitchen chair and read the note again. I thought about the birthdays I had thrown for them over the years. The cakes I made from scratch when we couldn't afford bakery ones. The nights I went without sleep sewing costumes or fixing late-night snacks. The years I worked double shifts at the diner so Christmas would still happen. No. They had decided I didn't fit in the life I built anymore. I was too much. Too slow. Too in the way. I walked down the hallway, pausing at the photos still hanging on the wall. All those smiles. First days of school. Prom dresses. Baby shoes. I had carried these people inside me through labor, through heartbreak, through poverty and storms and loneliness. And now they had written me out of the story. Like a side character they had no more use for. I made it to the living room, knees aching, and sat on the couch. The quiet started to settle into my bones like cold air. Heavy and still. There was a bag on the floor with my name on it. Inside were a few clothes, my pill organizer, and a roll of quarters. They hadn't even left me a phone. Just instructions. Unspoken but loud. Go. I wasn't sure where I would go. All my savings had been swallowed up by the house, the children, the life I had poured everything into. They owned the deed now. Claudine had suggested we simplify the paperwork last fall. I didn't read the fine print. I had trusted them. All of them. And now, on my 79th birthday, I sat alone in a house I no longer owned, holding a note I never imagined receiving. I was too stunned to cry. Too shocked to scream. But not too broken to plan. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the first ugly chapter in a book I didn't ask to write. But now I would finish. If you've ever felt discarded, replaced, or forgotten by the very people you raised, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful true life stories that speak what others won't. I didn't leave right away. I just sat there in the center of my own living room while the light from the kitchen window slid across the floor like it too was slowly retreating from me. I read the note again. "You raised us, now it's time to go." The paper crinkled in my hand. It was the kind of notebook paper you'd find in a high school binder. The kind I used to pack in their lunchboxes with reminders to smile, to breathe, to believe in themselves. Now here it was again, same paper, different tone. I had raced them right. Or so I thought. I stood up slowly, back creaking like an old porch swing, and walked into the guest bedroom where Tasha had been staying. The bed was still made, but the suitcase she'd left behind last week was gone. I looked at the bedside drawer and opened it. Empty. Not even a scrap of clothing or a hairpin. She hadn't packed in the middle of the night. She had packed days ago. Planned it. I moved on to Caleb's room. His guitar was gone. So was the old hoodie he wore to death. The one he used to wrap around me like a joke when I was cold. "Here, Ma. Let the cool kids keep you warm." Gone. Even the picture frame of us on the bookshelf had been flipped face down. That's when it hit me. They had left me not in a rush, but with intention. This wasn't a moment of heat. It was a decision. Quiet, cowardly, and final. I went into the kitchen, opened the fridge. They'd taken the good food, the meat, the milk, the snacks. What they left was expired yogurt, an old half loaf of bread, and a plastic container of pickles. Even the coffee was gone. I stood there, holding onto the edge of the countertop, feeling that familiar wave of dizziness when the world tilts just slightly, but enough to knock the air out of your lungs. I wasn't angry yet, just hollow. I made a cup of hot water and sat in the backyard, staring at the overgrown flower bed where I used to plant marigolds every spring. The sun was warming the grass, but I felt cold all over. It was Tasha who once cried when I missed a parent-teacher meeting. It was Caleb who clung to my legs when I dropped him off at kindergarten. It was Elijah who swore he'd never leave me alone after Daddy died. Now the silence around me was so loud I could hear the squirrels scratching in the trees. I thought about calling someone. But who? The ladies from church had their own problems. My sister passed 5 years ago. My cousin Violet was in a retirement home across state lines. And the kids had taken my phone charger. I checked the drawer by the couch anyway. They'd even taken my Bible. But they didn't take my name. They didn't take my memory. They didn't take what I had taught myself after all those years of scraping by. How to get back up. That afternoon I packed a new bag. Not the one they left me. No. I put in my photo albums. My house keys, even if they had changed the locks. My address book. A sweater my mother knitted for me that still smelled like cedar and lilac. I put in my hurt. I put in my pride. And I zipped it shut with the quiet knowledge that I was still here. I didn't have a plan yet. But I had a name. I had a story. And I had time to tell it. Because if they wanted me gone, they should have done it without leaving me breath. Because now I was going to use every ounce of it to find out why they left. And what they were hiding. The bus ride was quiet. I sat in the second seat from the back, clutching my brown handbag and watching as the town I thought I knew passed by like a memory I couldn't stop from fading. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay. Not in that house. Not in that silence. I had $26 in my wallet, 3 slices of bread wrapped in foil, and a folded piece of paper with my childhood friend's address on it. I hadn't seen Mabel in 15 years, but I remembered the way she used to say, "If you ever need to disappear for a while, baby, come find me." So that's what I did. Mabel lived on the east side, just outside of Carter Grove, in a little blue house with chipping paint and a magnolia tree that leaned like it had stories of its own. She opened the door with a frown, wearing a long robe and pink slippers. Then her face broke. "Hattie Lou," she whispered. I nodded. She didn't ask why I looked tired. She didn't ask about the bag in my hand. She just said, "Come inside." I sat at her table with a cup of coffee while she made cinnamon toast like we were still 25 and gossiping about boys. I told her everything. The note. The birthday. The empty house. She sat down across from me and covered my hand with hers. "I always thought Claudine had a sharp tongue," she said. "But Elijah used to be so sweet." "They all were," I said, "until I got too old to carry them." Mabel gave a soft hum. Sometimes children forget the arms that built their homes. I stayed in her guest room for 3 days. I washed my clothes. I called the bank. I called the county office. And that's when I found out what I was really up against. Elijah had transferred the deed of the house 6 months ago. Said I was no longer capable of managing property. Said I had voluntarily signed over rights for the family's protection. There was a signature on the form. My name. But not my writing. They had forged it. Every one of them. I stared at the printout in the county clerk's office like it had slapped me. The woman behind the desk looked nervous. "I'm sorry, ma'am. But legally, there's not much you can do unless you prove fraud." "How do I do that?" I asked. He shrugged. "You'll need a lawyer." Mabel helped me call a legal aid group. They said they'd take a look but warned me that cases like this were hard to prove without witnesses or a paper trail. I thanked them anyway, because I didn't need them to believe me right away. I just needed one of them to listen. That night, I sat on Mabel's porch and looked at the stars. They always looked closer in the country, like they might lean down and ask if you were okay. I whispered to the night sky. I gave them my whole life. And I swear the wind replied, "Now take it back." Because the thing they forgot when they left that note on my birthday was that I'm not just a mother. I'm not just the woman who tucked them in and showed up and stayed silent. I'm a person. And they turned me into a ghost before I was gone. But I'm still breathing. And I remember everything. I woke up the next morning with fire in my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Something deeper. Like a door that had been stuck for years suddenly creaked open inside me. Mabel handed me a bowl of oatmeal and asked if I wanted to go to church with her that Sunday. I said no. Not yet. I don't want prayers, I said. I want answers. She didn't push. Just handed me a small notepad from her drawer. "You used to love writing things down," she said. That notebook became my map. First I listed my kids' names. Elijah, 45, oldest, practical but quiet. Tasha, 42, sensitive, sharp, unpredictable. Caleb, 38, charming, always needed more help than he admitted. Next to each name I started writing questions. Why no? Who wrote the note? What were they afraid of? Because this wasn't just about betrayal. It was too clean. Too coordinated. Too planned. Mabel and I drove to the old library downtown. I pulled up court records. Property records. I searched my own name like I was hunting down a stranger. That's when I found something else. 2 months before my birthday, Elijah filed paperwork with a notary. It stated I had declining cognitive capacity. That I had agreed to simplify ownership of the house and assets for the benefit of the family. No doctor's signature. No diagnosis. Just legal words on legal paper. And no witness except Claudine, my daughter-in-law. Mabel looked over my shoulder at the screen. I knew she was slick, she muttered. But this is calculated. She's got a background in paralegal work, I said. Mabel raised her eyebrows. Well, she practiced all right. We took the printout home. I spent the afternoon reading every line, highlighting words I didn't understand. Mabel called her nephew. He was a junior attorney in Montgomery. He said he'd take a look at the documents. Don't promise her anything, I heard Mabel warn him on the phone, unless you're ready to help her get her name back. That night, I went through my old purse and found something I hadn't touched in years. A faded copy of the original deed to my house. Back when I bought it with Harold, may he rest. It had my signature. My maiden name. The year I worked 3 jobs just to qualify. Proof that I had once built something. Brick by brick. Year by year. Not for profit. For love. I ran my fingers across the paper. They had tried to erase me. Rewrite the story with themselves as the caretakers and me as the burden. But I wasn't done telling my story. The next day the lawyer called back. Said there were glaring inconsistencies in the documents Elijah submitted. He asked if I'd be willing to go on record. I'm not afraid of the truth, I told him. I just thought I'd never have to prove it to my own children. We set a meeting for the following week. A formal affidavit. One step closer to unraveling the lie they built together. But even as I moved forward, a question stuck in my heart like a splinter. Why did they need me gone? Why now after all these years? I was about to find out. And it would be worse than I imagined. Mabel drove me to the legal aid office on Wednesday morning. I wore my best blouse and the brooch my late husband gave me on our 40th anniversary. I wanted to walk in looking like someone who still had a name. Someone who deserved to be heard. The young attorney, Mr. Rylan, was kind. He held the door for me, pulled out a chair and offered me tea. But his eyes were serious. We need to be clear, Mrs. Carter. Once this is on record, there's no undoing it. Your children may be investigated. I looked him in the eye and said, they left me. All I'm doing is turning on the light. I signed the affidavit. Wrote everything down. Dates. Conversations. What was said. What I believed I had signed and what I now understood I hadn't. He slid me a copy. Now, he said, we let the system do its part. But while we wait, I want you to be prepared. Because once this starts, the people who abandoned you may want to speak again. I scoffed. Now they'll remember my number? He didn't smile. He just said, be ready. 3 days later, Tasha called. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Why are you doing this?" I sat up straighter on Mabel's couch. "Doing what, baby? You're tearing this family apart." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. "I tore it apart? You left me a note on my birthday." She didn't reply, so I kept going. "You wrote a sentence that took 40 years of love and crushed it into one insult. One command. One cold eviction. And now you're angry I'm still standing." "We didn't have a choice," she whispered. "Didn't you?" I asked. Because it looked a lot like a choice when y'all walked out the front door and didn't even leave a candle burning. She hung up, but not before I heard her sniffle. I sat there in the silence, staring at the phone, wondering if that was guilt, or just fear. Mabel brought me tea. "You okay?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I think one of them is breaking." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over that phrase, "We didn't have a choice." I thought about Elijah and Claudine's money troubles. About how Caleb had been laid off twice in the past year. About Tasha asking me just last fall if I could co-sign for her car. Was this all about money? Did they see me as a loose end? I remembered overhearing a conversation between Claudine and Tasha one evening. Something about eligibility and clearing liabilities. Back then I had assumed they were talking about loans. Well, I wasn't so sure. The next morning Rylan called. "We found something," he said. "You're listed as a dependent on Elijah's tax return. And there's a filing that suggests you were declared unable to live independently." "But I've been cooking, cleaning, paying bills on time." "Exactly. We think it was a false declaration to gain financial aid or housing credit." My stomach turned. "They didn't just want me out," I whispered. "They used me." "Yes," he said. "And now they're trying to bury that paper trail." I sat on the porch in Mabel's rocking chair and stared at the sky. I felt grief, not for what had been done, but for how long it had been building without me seeing it. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in through the cracks of memory, whispering you were never safe like you thought. Mabel sat beside me knitting. "You gonna keep going?" she asked softly. "I have to," I said. "Not for revenge, but because if they ever try this again, to someone else, I want a record of what it looks like when a woman fights back." Because the truth is, I raced them with the hope that they'd carry love forward. Instead, they tried to carry me out like a box of old clothes. But they forgot that I remember where every scar came from. And now I'm writing it down. On Sunday, Elijah showed up at Mabel's house. He didn't knock at first. Just stood at the edge of the porch like a child caught stealing from the kitchen. His truck was still running in the driveway. I could hear the engine purring like it wanted to take him far away from this confrontation. Mabel peeked through the curtain. "Do you want me to send him off?" "No," I said. "Let him in. Let him look me in the eye." He stepped inside slowly, holding his hat in both hands. Same as his daddy used to when he was nervous. His shoulders were tense, and his lips pressed together like he was chewing on a truth he didn't want to swallow. "Mama," he said, voice low. "Elijah," I answered, sitting on the edge of the couch, my back as straight as I could manage. "You didn't call. You didn't send a card. But now you want to talk." He sat across from me, looked down at the floor. "I didn't know she wrote the note," he said. "Claudine. She handled everything." I raised my eyebrows. "You didn't know I'd be alone in a house with nothing but silence and a suitcase? You didn't see the freezer emptied? My name pulled off the bills." He winced. "It wasn't supposed to go like that." "Then how was it supposed to go, Elijah? Was I supposed to fade away quietly so you could file whatever papers you needed without guilt getting in the way?" His throat worked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't have the words. Kept going. "I was your mother before you were anybody's husband. Before you were anyone's anything. I built that house for us after your father passed. I fed you with hands that blistered, loved you when there was nothing left in me but crumbs. And you signed me away like a burden." He looked up then, and for the first time I saw real shame in his eyes. "I messed up," he whispered. "I listened to her. I let the bills get ahead of me. Claudine said we could get assistance if I filed as your guardian. She said it was just paperwork. She said you wouldn't know. But I did know," I said. "Not at first. But the day I sat in silence on my birthday with nothing but that little slip of paper beside my plate, that was the day I knew you had traded my dignity for convenience. He nodded. I'm sorry. I stood. Sorry doesn't change the locks on a house I paid for. Sorry doesn't rewrite legal papers or bring back all the days you should have visited and didn't. Sorry doesn't warm the room I cried in. He stood too, now trembling. I'll fix it, he said. I'll get the house back. I'll testify if I need to. I'll talk to the lawyer. I shook my head slowly. You can help, I said. But you can't undo it. That's the part you'll have to carry. He looked broken, and I felt tired. So tired. Because forgiveness doesn't erase what's done. It just stops it from growing. But I wasn't ready to offer that yet. I don't hate you, I said. But I won't protect your guilt either. Mabel came in then, gentle as ever, and handed him a glass of water. You need to leave now, she said softly. Let her breathe. He nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't hug me. He just walked out with his hat pressed to his chest in a silence that said he finally understood. When the door closed, I sat back down. Mabel touched my shoulder. You all right? I'm getting there, I said, because I didn't get justice yet. But I got the truth out loud. And that was the first step. A letter came in the mail 2 days later. It was from the county clerk's office. They had reviewed the affidavit, the documents my lawyer submitted, and the falsified records Claudine had signed on my behalf. There would be a hearing. In 2 weeks. I held the envelope in both hands, rereading the words over and over like they might rearrange into something gentler, easier. But they didn't. Because this was the moment I would either reclaim what was mine, or be erased for good. Mabel was sitting on the porch, watering her begonias. I brought the letter out and read it to her. She nodded once. Good. Let them explain themselves to a judge now. I never wanted to fight my children in court, I said. And you still aren't, she replied. You're fighting to be seen. That's not the same. I sat next to her and listened to the breeze for a long while. A hummingbird hovered at the feeder. The sound of its wings was barely louder than the pounding in my chest. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. I wanted to sit in my own house again, not as a guest, not as a dependent, but as the woman who built it. That night, I opened my old journal and started to write again. Not just the facts but the feelings. How it felt to be discarded. How it felt to be told you were too much, too slow, too in the way. How it felt to wake up to silence and wonder if you had become invisible. I didn't write it for them. I wrote it for me. Because I needed to remember that I hadn't always been this version of myself. The woman sleeping in a borrowed bed with a suitcase half unpacked. I used to be fierce. I used to be light. And somewhere under all the pain I still was. The morning of the hearing came faster than I expected. Mabel insisted I wear the lavender dress with the gold buttons. You look like someone worth listening to in that one, she said. I sat in the backseat of her car and stared out the window, watching the world roll past in a blur of green fields and quiet sidewalks. At the courthouse, my hands trembled. Not from fear. From the weight of everything riding on this moment. Inside, the room smelled like old paper and tension. Elijah sat on the left, beside Claudine. He looked smaller than I remembered. Tasha wasn't there. Neither was Caleb. Just silence in the seats where my family used to be. The judge looked at me kindly as I took the stand. Mrs. Carter, he said, do you understand what this hearing is about? Yes, sir, I answered. It's about whether or not I'm still allowed to be the person I've always been. He nodded. Tell me your story. And so I did. From the birthday note, to the empty house, to the signatures that weren't mine, to the silence that tried to steal my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just told the truth. When I finished, the judge asked Claudine if she had anything to say. She stood, adjusting her scarf, and spoke with rehearsed politeness. We thought we were doing what was best for her, she said. She seemed tired, forgetful. We didn't want her to hurt herself or become a financial liability. You didn't ask me, I said, cutting in. You didn't talk to me. You decided for me. The judge raised his hand for silence. He didn't smile, but he looked at me like I mattered, like I was no longer a file. After a pause, he said the words I wasn't sure I'd ever hear. Effective immediately, all property and legal control reverts to Mrs. Hattie Carter. The guardianship arrangement is nullified due to evidence of fraud and lack of consent. I closed my eyes. Let the words wash over me. I didn't cheer. Didn't gasp. Just breathed. Deeply. Because I was finally standing in a room where my voice had been heard. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. The first time I stepped back into my house, it didn't feel like home. Not right away. The windows were still dusty. The air still held the faint scent of someone else's coffee. Claudine's perfume lingered in the hallway, sharp and floral, like a memory I didn't ask to remember. But it was my house again. The judge's ruling had been filed with the county. The keys were returned by a court officer. Elijah didn't show up when they came to collect them. It was just me and Mabel on the porch, watching as the law did what family should have done a long time ago. Give me back what was mine. We walked through the living room together. The couch had been moved. My favorite lamp was missing. The framed photos had been replaced by newer ones that didn't include me. Mabel stood still. You want to throw it all out? No, I said. I want to rearrange it. Like memory. Room by room we cleaned. We opened windows. We lit candles. I sat on the edge of my old bed and ran my hand across the quilt I made when the kids were small. Each square stitched with scraps from their childhood clothes. The tears came slow and quiet. Not for what was gone. For what I still had. My hands. My voice. My name on the deed. Mabel made tea that evening and we sat at the kitchen table just like we used to in the old days. This time I made the toast. You're different, she said softly. I'm tired, I replied. No, baby. You're rooted. Like something that survived the storm. I thought about that as I stared out the window. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. But I felt real. Like I had finally peeled back the layers they wrapped me in. Not a burden. Not an obligation. Just a woman who made it back. The phone rang late that night. I let it go to voicemail. But the next morning I listened. It was Caleb. His voice cracked as he spoke. Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't know what they were doing at first. I didn't want to choose sides. But now I see what happened. I miss you. He paused. I'm scared to call again, but I had to say something. I didn't call back. Not yet. Not because I wanted him to hurt. But because silence has a weight too. And sometimes the people who abandoned you need to sit in the echo they created. I went to the backyard and planted new marigolds. The dirt felt cool and soft in my fingers. I thought about the day they left me. The suitcase by the door. The note beside the plate. And I thought about this day. The trowel in my hand. My feet planted firm in my own soil. I wasn't just reclaiming space. I was replanting my presence. Not loud. Not flashy. Just there. Unmovable. That evening I opened my journal again. This time I didn't write about them. I wrote about me. About the girl who once believed that love guaranteed loyalty. About the woman who now knew better. And about the grandmother who was going to leave behind a story worth telling. Not just one of betrayal, but one of strength. I closed the book with a smile. Because healing doesn't come in one courtroom or one phone call. It comes in the quiet moments when you choose yourself again. And again. And again. The invitations went out quietly. Just a few. Not to make a statement, but to make a shift. I decided to host a small gathering. My own version of a homecoming. Not for the ones who left, but for the ones who stayed, who listened, who helped me pick up the broken pieces without asking for anything in return. I sent one to Miss Evelyn from church, who brought casseroles when I was sick. One to Mr. Howard, the old mailman who once shoveled my sidewalk without ever mentioning it. And one to Ryland, my lawyer, who looked at me like a client, not a case file. I also sent one to Caleb. No RSVP required. Just, if you still want to see me, you'll know where to find me. No note for Claudine. No invitation for Tasha. Elijah. I didn't know what to do with him yet. The day of the gathering, I put on my blue dress with the lace collar. The one I wore to my husband's retirement dinner. I hadn't worn it since. It still fit. Mabel came early with peach cobbler and laughter that warmed the walls. We set out folding chairs in the yard. under the old oak tree that once held Elijah's tire swing. I made sweet tea and chicken salad sandwiches. And I waited. People came. Not in droves but in waves. One by one, like kindness had been waiting for permission to return. Mr. Howard brought me a potted fern. Miss Evelyn brought laughter and stories. Ryland stayed for an hour, then excused himself quietly, saying he had another case. But he'd be back next week with updates on the next step to reclaim damages. And then just before sunset, I saw a beat-up old car park along the curb. Caleb stepped out. Hair longer, face thinner, shoulders heavy. He held a small box in his hands. I stayed seated. He walked slowly across the yard like someone unsure if the ground would welcome him. He stopped a few feet from me and whispered, "Mama." I looked at him for a long time. Then I nodded at the empty chair beside me. He sat down, didn't speak for a minute, then opened the box. Inside was a photo frame, one I hadn't seen in years. It was a picture of us, me and the kids sitting on the porch laughing. No filters, no matching outfits, just happiness. "I kept this," he said, "even when I didn't call, even when I should have." I stared at the photo. I remembered that day. It was the year before Claudine started talking about power of attorney. The last year things still felt normal. "I was scared," he said. "I thought, maybe you wouldn't want to hear from me." I looked at him gently. "I wanted to hear from you every day, Caleb. I just stopped expecting it." He lowered his eyes. "I can't change what I didn't do, or what I didn't stop." "No," I said, "but you came. That matters." And it did. Because healing isn't perfect. It's not a fairy tale with a final kiss. It's a quiet seat beside the one you hurt, a box of memories in your hand, and a heart finally brave enough to show up. We didn't hug. Not yet. But we sat together. And sometimes that's how rebuilding begins. It's been 5 months since the note. 5 months since I was left with a suitcase, a silence, and a decision. Stay broken or stand back up. The house feels different now. Not because the walls changed, but because I did. The pictures on the walls are mine again. I've put up the ones that matter. Baby photos, graduation days, even a few snapshots of me and Mabel laughing on the porch. They remind me that life has chapters and not all of them are about pain. Every morning I make coffee. For no one else, just me. I sit by the window in the kitchen, the same one I once stared out of wondering why my children turned away. Now I stare out at the world I reclaimed and whisper a small thank you to the woman who didn't stay quiet. The community knows my story now. It spread like stories do, first through whispers at church, then through the local paper. They wrote an article titled, "Woman 79 Wins Back Her House and Her Dignity." I didn't like the headline, because I never lost my dignity. They just stopped seeing it. But I smiled when I read it, because someone finally wrote it down. And this time they got part of it right. Caleb visits sometimes. Not every day, but when he comes he brings things. Old jokes. Fresh groceries. Once he brought his daughter. He's 4, shy, and likes my cinnamon toast. He called me Grandma Hattie without hesitation. And something inside me healed a little right then. I didn't ask about Tasha. I didn't reach out to Elijah again. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always an open door. Sometimes it's just closing your own door without bitterness and choosing peace instead of pain. I still write in my journal. One day, BA's cousin, she's starting a publishing group for elder voices, called and asked if I'd ever consider turning my writings into something more. Like a book? I asked. Like a record, she said. Of what it means to be discarded and still come back stronger. I told her I'd think about it. Because I don't know if the world needs my story in print. But I do know this. There's a woman out there sitting on the edge of a bed, holding a note that says she doesn't belong anymore. And maybe if she hears my voice, she'll know that the story doesn't end there. That a note on your birthday doesn't define you. That silence isn't a verdict, it's a challenge. And that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it rocks quietly on a front porch and says, "I'm still here." Because I am. And I always will be. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And share it with someone who needs to remember they're not alone.